The Criterion Collection is colonizer nonsense. Martin Scorsese's Film Foundation is colonizer nonsense. The way the Western world treats films outside its orbit is ignorant, disgusting, and dehumanizing. I am a U.S. citizen who grew up in the U.S. and has vacationed outside of the U.S. Arguably, the action in itself is inherently ignorant and exploitative, and I have an anecdote to prove it. And I don't even need that anecdote to prove it, because several of the white American artists who literally defined and reinvented how the entire world sees art, I'm talking Warhol and Ginsberg and especially Capote, are all ignorant, racist American pieces of colonial crap at the end of the day. To prove this, all I have to do is mention the North African country of Morocco. 1995. Morocco is probably the most environmentally dissonant country in the world that my ignorant American butt ever had to learn about, specifically because of its historical status as a haven for colonizer white savior artists. Frankly, the theme of this video wasn't supposed to be about all this, but one of the films that I need to talk about is an anthology of Paul Bowles' short stories. Who's Paul? Don't worry, we'll get there. But I'm just saying that I intended to make a simple video about cinematic environmental dissonance as it relates to the three 1995 films that the random number deities chose. Why did I choose that topic? Because the three films I landed on each share environmental dissonance as a common element. Again, the RNG picks the movies, so I gotta figure out the topic from there. All this other stuff came into play when I had to start thinking about the why and what makes the films successful or unsuccessful at environmental dissonance, and the freaking Paul Bowles film threw me down a rabbit hole of my own problems with the kinds of international art curation styles that are fueled by Western sensibilities and are seen as unimpeachable by the ignorant masses. You know that feeling you get when you have a problem with a specific institution and you can't pinpoint why, and then you figure out exactly why? Yeah, that's what happened with me. So yeah, this video is about environmental dissonance, but in the process I might ruin your favorite modern artist and your perception of art history, and for that, I'm not going to say sorry. I'm going to say congratulations. But before we get to the fun part, let's first analyze a failing attempt and then a successful attempt at cinematic environmental dissonance so that you understand what I'm even talking about when I say those words.
In the 23rd year after the apocalypse,
I haven't seen anything like this in over 20 years.
a new biological weapon was released.
You touched that.
A virus that made sexual relations fatal.
He chased me, and then he...
Don't touch anything! The place is lousy with the plague!
Propagating the final war between the sexes. Driving humanity to the brink of extinction. But one man
You stand before this court charged with treason.
How do you plead? I'd kind of like to sleep on it.
was willing to risk everything.
If someone has ingested this serum, they're able to have sex. I'll live to tell about it.
Do you still remember how to do it?
It's like riding a bicycle.
What do you want with me?
Little favor.
I'd rather die by a bullet than the awful death that you have planned.
You're not gonna die. I promise.
They say they've invented a serum that counteracts the plague. That allows men and women to...
I'm gonna pretend I didn't hear what you just said. You get the troops ready. Our mission is to destroy these heretics.
James Brolin, Richard Lynch, and Brian Genesee. Terminal virus.
Okay, so I know the trailer had the music and the explosions and all that, but this movie is bad. It is bad for you. It is bad for me. This movie is bad for society. Fortunately, for society. It is also garbage quality-wise, so nobody has to think about it or talk about it. Honestly, I kind of resent the random number generator for picking this film for me to even talk about, but here we are. Fortunately, because the random number generator could pick it twice, I don't have to go in excruciating detail about every reason why I pretty much hate this movie. I mean, if you think about the plot for more than 2 seconds, it is stupid and bad and doesn't make sense and narratively implies the worst about humanity. Not even AI could come up with something this bad. It is stupid, and it does not make sense, and it is not worthy of thought. In the current rankings, this movie is the third from the bottom. I am receiving psychic damage, and I haven't even begun engaging with the story because my brain keeps thinking about where I should start, but my mouth is in active resistance. Yes, I am stalling because I don't want to talk about it. I don't care about your entertainment at all in this instance. You know, I initially planned to start this portion of the video with a review of Terminal Virus, but now that I think about it, I'll start with its utter failure at establishing environmental dissonance, because I hate this movie so much that the review, or whatever I say next, will probably emerge as a series of natural interjections and asides. Okay, so as you heard in the trailer, Terminal Virus is Boys vs. Girls the movie. The premise is that it is post-apocalyptic, which means a cheap film shoot in the desert where the money goes to the pyrotechnics. The apocalypse happened because a weapon made no one want to do each other anymore. To make that premise and then have it lead to a boys versus girls genocidal apocalypse is like only a 10-year-old white boy in Oklahoma whose parents got in a fight yesterday morning would come up with this outcome for this premise. No, actually the kid would still do a better job because he is emotionally invested in the issue. This premise is the kind of thing President 47 would come up with on the fly in a speech. That is a more apt comparison because these filmmakers operated with an equal amount of carelessness. This movie was a paycheck, and not a big paycheck like a this covers a third paycheck. Like they literally just didn't bother, so why should I? Anyways, if we ignore the absurd implication that the only thing keeping all couples everywhere from enacting gendered genocide is lust, which is asking a lot, I apologize, and focus on the environment that such a story would create, we get, nothing interesting whatsoever. For real. All the audience is given environmentally are boring mountains, boring buildings, and bland basements. There is no noticeable distinction between the society of boys or the society of girls. Everyone's also white, so I can safely assume the Nazis won before the nuclear sex war. Nothing about this environment, other than the film's offensively stupid premise, inspires dissonance. Not a single one of the settings makes me wonder about if the world is a distorted reality. Nothing about this film appears off. And it is a real shame because if anything about this film actually attempted to be creative regarding the execution of its premise, I would be able to give it credit for presenting anything memorable or worth thinking about. Even if the dissonance were accidental, it would give me the opportunity to psychoanalyze somebody's choices. Nobody is psychotic in this situation, only boring cheapskate pragmatists involved here. What a waste of time. Where is the effort? Oh, wait, I found it! This is where all the effort is.
Now, some of this next footage may be too gruesome for some audience members, so viewer discretion is advised.
I don't know what it is, but I feel really weird tonight. Like something's gonna happen.
Me too.
$666. And then that. I love this show, man.
There's something evil about it.
Police so far have only one clue. This skull earring. Often worn by homosexuals, Satanists.
Like, had sex with two people at the same time?
There just isn't a place for us in this world.
Okay, Miss America, you win.
The Doom Generation is one of those films that bears the risk of sabotaging the entire video. You like color theory, you like gender theory, you like queer theory, you like counterculture, you like counterculture, crises of faith, satirical violence. The Doom Generation is expertly crafted. The environmental dissonance is intentional. No, it is more than that even. It is the narrative itself. The Doom Generation exists not only as an example of counterculture, as it is traditionally understood and felt, it's a satirical indictment of counterculture as it is understood and felt at the same time. How so? Let me break it down for you. I mean, I could literally start with the fact that it's billed as a heterosexual movie by Greg Araki, a decision our homeboy made because after making totally a bunch of suits were like, yo, Araki, we love this, we dig it. By the way, why it gotta be so gay? Make the next one heterosexual, please. You are scaring the unofficial representatives of Axe body spray, and that is a key demographic. And Araki was like, oh, you want a heterosexual movie? I'll give you a heterosexual movie. Welcome to gay hell. You see, the Doom Generation takes place in America. Normal America. Okay, I know, the images that I am probably displaying on screen at this moment are the kind that make you doubt what I just said. Literally, what about any of this production design screams normal in any city other than Portland on this earth, let alone normal America? Well, that's where the environmental dissonance comes in. The visual language of the Doom Generation is that of a teenager. But like, a teenager now is not what a teenager was at that time, and one of the main reasons is that MTV is over a decade old at this point, and 9/11 hasn't come in to ruin everything yet. That is the world we're dealing with. And this strong countercultural 90s thread is precisely the lens through which the camera and set design views the American landscape. So that's one layer of environmental dissonance already embedded. But what if I told you there's actually a second layer at work here? And that this second layer is what makes this film a true masterpiece to dissect and deservedly get that sweet, succulent Criterion Collection treatment. Yes, I know I literally just called the Criterion Collection colonizer nonsense, and it still really is, but that isn't quite an indictment of taste whatsoever. It's an indictment of methodology and curation philosophy, but we'll get there when we get there. Just wait, okay? Okay? Where was I? Right. The second layer. Yeah, not only is the Doom Generation a quiet endorsement of the counterculture, it also demonstrates the dissonance that occurs once that culture is commodified and exploited by the suit-wearing forces it originally claims to resist. I mean, a heterosexual movie by Greg Araki really says it all. The subtext there is, this is exploitation, the fix is in. The corporate capitalization on the counterculture that led to this movie's release is in itself dissonant. In my counterculture video, I talk about how Mallrats is still quite conventional but wears counterculture as a suit. With the Doom Generation, Araki is saying, this counterculture suit they want me to wear fits funny, smells weird, and might be laced with poison despite how cool it looks. Counterculture, taboo, and danger all play in the same hair metal band. They do solo projects from time to time, but it's a hell of a show when they're playing together. The Doom Generation is a timeless song on their greatest hits album. It is a song about devilish temptation and how it frees you from oppression. It is a song about how the devil can free you from societal bondage but cannot save you from the evils of so-called righteous crusaders. It is a song about how this kind of freedom isn't free from the evils of exploitation and violence, and in fact creates a loose enough atmosphere for those elements to hide and be ignored. Let's look at Amy Blue. This idea is most demonstrable with her environmental interactions in the film. Everybody who sees her claims to recognize her.
Sunshine?
Give me some money.
Sunshine, is that you?
I think you have me mixed up with someone else. Don't add face. Give me some money.
Don't lie to me now. I know it's you.
Look, you fucking chunky pumpkin head. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Bambi? Is it really you?
Fuck.
It's me, George. Your poopsie. Your snuggly bear.
Look, smegma breath. I don't know who the fuck you think I am. Will you just do me a favor and evacuate?
Bambi. Hold on. Don't do this.
Fuck this shit.
Abby! Abby! Please.
Kitten! Kitten, is that you?
Oh, God.
Don't you recognize me? It's me. Randy. It's your eternal love slave. Your slave.
Look, lady, I don't know who you are, but
Has this guy shot you full of dope and brainwashed you like all the others? You're high, aren't you? You okay? It's me. It's me, honey cake. It's me. I know it's you. I can smell your perfume.
Amy Blue, age 18. Height 5'1", weight 92 pounds. Eyes hazel, hair brown. Cumulative SAT score 666.
The kind of woman she is so ubiquitous to American society that she is constantly approached by strangers and has to perpetually be on guard because she has no clue which ones will threaten violence and how quickly. It does not matter if you are at a drive-thru.
Isn't that nice? I figure if I can't have you, no one will.
what's going on?
Bitch. I'm gonna find her. And I'm gonna kill her.
It does not matter if you are at the gay bar with Parker Posey.
Bitch. I'm gonna find her. And then I'm gonna kill her.
The violence is constant, and if I had legs, I would totally kick you right now. America likes to treat Epstein Island and Diddy parties as exceptionally dangerous environments, but is too scared and too culpable to honestly sit with the fact that for our teenage ladies, for our Amy Blues, Epstein Island is actually everywhere to a lesser degree. Organized American evil often disguises itself as incidental in countercultural spaces, and that is one of the scariest things about how it operates in the spaces where darkness is discussed and explored, because a villain can always hide a crime behind an unhealthy admiration for Niccolo Machiavelli. It's called the Teen Apocalypse Trilogy for a reason. The entirety of the Doom Generation is painted with colorful, beautifully eclectic landscapes of freedom, but the freedom is not liberation. No one is liberated here. Not really. They will still ask you to make a heterosexual film, and the best you can do is say, fine, but I resent the request and it will cost you $6.66. Expressing a dissonant existence with intentionality is a wonderful thing to do with an art form. it's so impactful when there's intentionality behind it. That is why terminal viruses' utter lack of presence offends me so. They did that, while Gregoraki did this. I mean, come on. But now that we've seen the two extremes of what environmental dissonance does as a presence in a film and how a film suffers without it, it is time for the main course of this video. All of this has been preparation for what I want to examine next, because what happens when the environmental dissonance is not intentional but a natural extension of the ideologies and sensibilities of an acclaimed artist's unchecked arrogance? Things get weird. Criterion Collection weird. It is time to meet Paul Bowles. Allow me, if you will, to preface this section with a personal anecdote about the international vacation I took with my mom to South Africa and more specifically, Zimbabwe. The year is a month before we realized a pandemic was happening. We land in South Africa, exit the plane, and the fix is already in. We're immediately approached by a horde of humans willing to take our bags from us. We politely decline and move forward. Because of the nature of global economics at that time, this is not an uncommon thing that happens when the ignorant American tourist arrives in a location where a single US dollar is the equivalent of 30 trillion local currency dollars or whatever. There's a lot more I could say about the South Africa part, but the more relevant part is Zimbabwe. So let's skip to Zimbabwe, because part of our reason to go to Zimbabwe was to witness Victoria Falls. For those born in 2010 or later, when we stopped teaching classically colonialist, sensationalist geography, Victoria Falls is a wonder of the world. There's 7 of them, you collect them like the Dragon Balls, and you get to make a wish or something. The Gen X Americans' fascination with Indiana Jones-style colonialist geography caused by how geography was taught in schools needs to be looked into and studied, but I digress. Not only did we go to Victoria Falls, we stayed at the historic Victoria Falls Hotel. What's the big deal about the Victoria Falls Hotel? Well, it is a tourist attraction in itself because it's historic. And what is the attraction of this attraction? Colonizer roleplay. If I go on for too long, it will basically become a whole separate video essay, but like, you know how Indiana Jones used to be a thing and like no one was critical about it? You know how the rich people who kill giraffes like to wear that funny hat? You know, like the board game Jumanji's physical representation of toxic paternalistic masculinity who also wears the funny hat? Like that Western colonial adventurer Kool-Aid that American toxic masculine manly men used to aspire to before the internet told them they should spend more time hating women? The thing that inspires the bigwigs in Hollywood to make movies like Jungle Cruise starring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Kraven the Hunter or Indiana Jones and the Prune Juice, only for those movies to fail horribly because the belief in the tropes that accompany these things has waned dramatically. What kinds of tropes? The kind that are likely to come to mind when you are 10 years old sitting in front of the TV waiting to watch Ed, Edd and Eddy and that one Zoo Books commercial, you know, the one with the tiger poster comes on.
Now your child can visit steamy jungles, grassy plains, and the dark depths of the oceans to meet and learn surprising facts about the magnificent animals that live there, all through the captivating, colorful pages of Zoo Books, the publication especially created for young readers. Each monthly issue of Zoo Books is packed with breathtaking full-color photos and scientifically accurate illustrations, plus games and puzzles. Today, through this exclusive TV offer, you can get 12 fascinating issues of Zoo Books for the special price of $19.95. When you call and use your credit card, we'll include the Elephants issue as a gift. Plus, you'll also get the colorful collection of animal stickers and the tiger poster. So order Zoo Books today and send learning and fun to a child you love.
To order 12 fascinating issues of Zoo Books for $19.95, call 1-800-441-2400. When you call, we'll include the bonus elephant issue, stickers, and tiger poster with your order. Call 1-800-441-2400. You must be 18 years or older to call.
Where was I? Right, the hotel. Yeah, it's the kind of place that has taxidermy heads on the walls, okay? Frankly, the Victoria Falls Hotel is a relic of colonial culture, a culture that evokes the image of plantation servitude, of old white people luxuriating at the outdoor breakfast tables while the white-gloved African waitstaff stand vigil, of Sidney Pollack winning 7 Oscars for directing a love story that completely panders to a westernized navel gaze, arrogantly ignoring and even romanticizing the reality of the violent European imperial project that makes that love story possible.
You see, I had a farm in Africa at the foot of the Ngong Hills. But it began before that. It really began in Denmark. I had a farm in Africa. I had a farm in Africa at the foot of the Ngong Hills. I had a farm in Africa.
God, I hate that movie. Call me biased, call it a creative pet peeve, but I will never not be perturbed by works of art that endorse a privileged prestige narrative of white navel-gazing that either erases or exploits histories of messy colonial violence in the service of tender, environmental, romantic imaginations of colonizing populations. Perhaps I would hate it less if powerful artistic establishments didn't reward it and enshrine it so freaking often. It's the reason why Train Dreams gets nominated for Best Picture over no other choice. It's the root of the problems of Out of Africa and Gone with the Wind. And it's frankly the reason why Emerald Fennell is such a problem. She just also happens to be a hack and poorly conceals her colonialist impulses behind the implied penis size of Jacob Elordi.
Like, you do realize Emerald Fennell is like basically aristocracy, right? And you do realize Elordi is Australian, right? I don't know about you, and I haven't done any research on this, but I would not be surprised if aristocratic fetishization of the men of the penal colony was a thing.
Emerald Fennell is so irritatingly colonial bougie that Jacob Elordi looks like Heathcliff to her. That is how frustratingly deep the colonial project is, and we are still reckoning with it to this day. Everything I just spoke on encompasses the environmental dissonance I felt when watching Paul Bowles' Half Moon. The film is an anthology depicting 3 short stories. One is about some newlyweds on the Amazon River, one is a love triangle conflict in Morocco, and one is about an Indian boy who talks to a cobra. All three of these stories would theoretically have different and distinct tones to them, yet in examining all three of these stories, I felt the same flavor of environmental dissonance, and it drove me crazy figuring out what that feeling was about and why the movie made me feel the way it did. And if my tangents when I got to this section of the video are any indicator, my attempt to articulate my findings is actively driving me crazy. Orientalist colonialism and its subsequent romanticization is an actual conspiracy, so I feel like a conspiracy theorist when I try to talk about it, because no matter what I say about it, there's another nuance or caveat right under the surface attempting to discreetly stab me in the kidney. So I'm going to break it down question by question to explain what makes this film environmentally dissonant. I actually didn't fully finish my anecdote about Zimbabwe. There's another thing that happened, but it's better to save that part for later, because it's more important to vividly describe, as best I can, the specific flavor of privileged navel-gazing we're dealing with. Question 1. What made the movie feel dissonant? Well, the cinematography and editing, for one. It does the beauty and stillness thing that is often overpraised by people who have a bias against highly commercial or pop culture based art. That doesn't necessarily prove its dissonance, but what stood out to me was a noted lack of fun. There is not enough gravity of score or gravity of visual filter for the shorts to count as melodrama, but there are also not enough systemic structures explicitly included in these three stories for them to be realistic, but there is also not enough whimsy for them to be entirely fantastic. This is the kind of thing that happens when you have a parasocial relationship with a physical location like Paul Bowles had with Morocco, where he wrote his stories in translations. Because you're unwilling to explore a place beyond the privileged lens of the American expatriate artiste seeking freedom, your artistic work becomes at best vaguely hollow and at worst a blatant misrepresentation. This is why I have a problem with certain flavors of Criterion Collection enjoyer, and to a certain extent the Criterion Collection as a governing body of cinematic quality. Identity is inherently attached to artistic preference because it's literally who you are. Objectivity isn't actually real, and the belief in it represents a bias in itself. That can lead to intentional as well as unintentional exclusionary and tokenizing behavior towards people and cultures that don't fit the curatorial standards or artistic merits of the group claiming to represent objectivity. The Criterion Collection has always been run by powerful white men since its founding in the 1980s. To claim itself as an objective arbiter of quality art is intellectually dishonest. And if I feel like being dramatic, I would also call it a moral failing. I honestly think they market themselves that way out of what was at first genuine white ignorance, but now refuses to change or do anything risky with that public perception, because if you tell white people you're the objective truth teller, you will get so much more money from them. They love that stuff, probably because of an obsession with Greek philosophers that dates back to the Holy Roman Empire or something. I don't know, I'm spitballing. Speaking of white entitlement, question 2. Why do American artists travel the world anyways? Okay, so as far as the whole world order situation is concerned, the United States is like the mafia boss of the world. We show up, we practice benevolence for the sake of soft power and public relations, but never forget to ask, scratch that, demand, where is my cut? Because we're the big boy on the playground, we get to be all sanctimonious about that and write pretty words about the Statue of Liberty, and people do come here and they do prosper. But unfortunately, white people look at the Statue of Liberty and say liberty is for white people only, actually. And when you ask who white people are, their answer is going to be, not you. The power or weakness of that caveat is often depending on who is in power to enforce it. So vote. International artists come here and they are looking to step up their expertise in business or academia or culture, and they succeed at that by either becoming a white people or becoming an in spite of white people. Both are profitable because white people like paying for both. Sorry, I don't make the rules. Also, the kind of America I'm describing is currently in the middle of not being that description anymore, both by choice and by perception. Even our dollar is getting actively devalued, so not even the cynical reason for coming here is a reason anymore, but whatever. That's the dynamic of artists coming here. So why do our artists travel out there? They do it to become more cultured, or whatever. They do it to escape the limiting confines that make up what we know as the American experience. It's a combination of escapism and creative vanity, and if you think that structural white supremacy doesn't impact the attitudes of American artists upon landing elsewhere, you are dead wrong. If you've seen White Lotus, you know exactly what I mean. There is a difference between when James Baldwin escapes to France for a bit and when Paul Bowles and the beatniks he hung out with land in Morocco. Did I even explain who the man is? I talked this much already and I still haven't. Okay, question 3. Who is Paul Bowles? Paul Bowles is an American composer, author, and translator. First of all, that's weird. That's a weird mix of things to be. When someone says something like producer, singer, songwriter, it's easy to understand the scope they're working with and how self-contained it is. Composer and author, okay. Multi-hyphenate. Throw translator in there and all of a sudden, if you think about it for a couple minutes, you'll start asking fascinating questions about objectivity, creativity, and the impacts of personal lens and personal choices by those who conduct translations. Things that can get messy. And with Paul, things really did. Let's break those categories down now. Who was Paul the composer? Well, Paul was a late 1920s New Yorker who was good at art and music. The man was born in freaking Queens and would go to Paris sometimes and study music with freaking Aaron Copland. Don't know who Aaron Copland is? He basically invented what one associates as, like, the modern American canon of classical music, I guess. There are art schools named after him. Bro is like in the upper echelons of the snooty pantheon of the American music and composing profession. When the caviar eaters think of classical music from the United States, they think of Aaron Copland, okay? So yeah, not only was Paul Bowles reared in the era that invented the aesthetic of modernist Americana in music, visual arts, dance, etc., he was also a weirdo genius Magnolia kid. Not only was he an only child, but he was already writing surrealistic poetry and music by the time he was 4 freaking years old, dude. Dude went to freaking college listening to Duke Ellington and Gregorian chants for fun, okay? So this weirdo art genius from Queens goes about his weirdo art genius New Yorker who sometimes cosplays as Emily in Paris life. Until 1947, when Paul Bowles moves to Tangier and stays there for 52 freaking years. Morocco is where he starts to write his stories, creating a famous body of work. This is also where he will become a translator of French and Portuguese and Spanish stories. Of course he would. He's a genius. Remember? But most notably, Paul over here translated hundreds, possibly thousands, but I'm not looking it up right now, of stories from native Moroccan oral storytellers. An easy argument can be made that the work of Paul Bowles is in the DNA of all 20th century literature and music, at least as far as America is concerned. In my mind, as I understand it, Paul Bowles is one of the originators of modern white Western wanderlust. Like, if on one side you have like Commodore Perry showing up with the military, And on the other, you have Anthony Bourdain, who shows up with a curious mind, an open heart, and an even bigger stomach. Paul Bowles rests at the inflection point where his expatriation to Morocco, and more specifically Tangier, represents a Dances with Wolves style luxuriating in the benefits of one's standing on the colonial totem pole to quietly remain either blind or uncaring to the gaze you use to exoticize the experience. But yes, this is where the man became an author. This is where the short stories depicted in Half Moon were written. And this is where the feeling of environmental dissonance comes in. Because, you see, it is not the structure and depicting of the stories themselves that rang as environmentally dissonant, it was the nature and style of the depiction. You know how the kids call movies that have a lot of talking in them, or have minimal to no score pretentious? I got a feeling similar to that impulse while I was watching Half Moon. I wouldn't call this anthology movie pretentious, though. In fact, I wouldn't even call it deceptive. I had no issue with the performances, yet somehow all three stories felt the same. And yes, cinematic anthologies have thematic through lines, of course, but these three different stories did not inspire a distinct feeling of difference in tone, style, or visual technique. That would be okay if the characters ran into each other at different points, like I've seen in rom-com and horror anthologies, but that is not the case here. The film is impacted by a flattening gaze that evokes feelings of distance and displacement. And this makes sense in the context of the couple on the boat in the Amazon, but it really doesn't for the bleak love triangle story or the final story with the cobra. That is what makes the film environmentally dissonant for me. Its stories and presentation authentically embody the gaze of a transplant who believes themselves to be an eclectic authority, but in actuality, said authority, and in quotation marks, exploration, only exists because of and is enhanced by the direct meddling of Western world colonizers. I mean this literally. So literally that I will include a direct quote from a long article I found titled, "So Why Did I Defend Paul Bowles?" by Hisham Aidi in the New York Review.
It's actually a wonderfully complicated, deeply personal piece that perfectly encapsulates the kind of thing I'm trying to describe in regards to the relationship between literary legacy, celebrity, white supremacy, and the residue of colonial entitlement. I highly recommend it. It perfectly answered why the movie felt emotionally dissonant in an arguably unintentional but still insidious way. Quote, "European powers and the Moroccan monarchy have long competed for control of Tangier. In November 1912, Spain and France negotiated a treaty that partitioned Morocco, turning their spheres of influence into formal protectorates. Tangier's status was negotiated separately, and in December 1923, France, Spain, and the United Kingdom signed the Tangier Protocol in Paris, setting up a new administration and placing the city at the center of a 150 square mile international zone, overseen by a committee of 9 Western powers. The city was henceforth governed by a court that included French, Spanish, and British judges, along with the Mendoub, the Moroccan Sultan's representative. It is this international period, from 1923 to 1956, especially post-war, that has shaped the image of Tangier as a free port, a tax haven, and a place of international intrigue and excess." This is the kind of colonial audacity that everyone is still reckoning with to this day. This is the kind of situation that attracts bougie artists because they get to pretend that they are escaping the stifling grip of their home countries. They get to cosplay as conscientious adventurers when really all they're doing is taking advantage of colonial oppression to go on a cheap vacation, or in Paul's case, a funny hat staycation. Am I being too harsh here? Possibly. I mean, the man is a literary legend with an era-defining body of work. He really did translate and transcribe like 15 volumes of stories from Moroccan authors. He did that. And yet, even though he did that, even though he has genuine love and interest for Morocco, Paul Bowles would say stuff like, quote, "In a land like Morocco, the production of written literature is of course negligible. On the other hand,
The Moroccans have a magnificent and highly evolved sense of rhythm, which manifests itself in the twin arts of music and dance. Like, dude, Moroccan writers have been publishing their work since the 1930s, as well as literal centuries of literature written in Arabic, the language that you never bothered to learn, Paul. Paul even has a history of standing with the Berber population during Morocco's becoming independent, only for the basis of this support to be a combination of his Islamophobia and his preference and romanticization of the Morocco that is a tax haven for white artists. In summary, Paul did the right things for the wrongest reasons, and this leads me to a philosophical question for: is it possible to see the unique wrongness of a unique wrongdoer in their art? I think it sneaks its way in there sometimes. If you watch any interview with any person who created something, their self is always there. Their feelings, their sensibilities, their sensitivities find a way into the art. It often gets more intense the more famous they become. So when I criticize the Criterion Collection's curation practices, when I think of the framing conventions used to treat every piece of art from the global south like it's a rescue puppy, I feel a dissonance. And the textures and tensions of Half Moon feel as wide as the ocean, only to cut as thick as my pinky toe. Well, actually, it's not that it lacks depth. It's just that the depths begin to slowly poison you the deeper you go, only to realize you are drowning in the systemic privilege you believed you were escaping, only for your ultimate punishment to be conducting the orchestra for a video game music concert in the Philippines. No, I won't say which video game, watch the movie! It is the interaction at the one ATM in town where a local yells, "You walk like you own the place," at you with a degree of vitriol you never expected. And that was me, staying at the Victoria Falls Hotel in Zimbabwe. And that was Paul Bowles, continually ignoring the works of local academics and focusing on the most impoverished locals in the city who have naturally the most sensational, salacious stories. But at the end of the day, the actual dissonance needs to exist in order for the deliberate counter-dissonance to be effective and understood. Because if we don't understand it, then the art we make that needs it to be present will always be lackluster. Wait, is that the end of the script? It is. It is! I made it! Here's where all the films discussed rank in the current rankings. Next time, I'll have something a little different now that I broke 400. I'm thinking maybe a series of tier lists, 50 movies each, I don't know, I get ideas is all. Until then...